Keep moving! They're getting closer!
I can't! It's too deep!
You must! Hold on to me!
They're getting closer!
I know! Keep running! You can't escape! Almost there! Hold on!
It started innocently enough with a modest advertisement tucked in the April 14th, 1847 edition of the St. Charles Herald. Sandwiched between pitches for steam-powered cotton presses and patent elixirs promising to cure swamp fever, a brief notice announced, "Missing Mrs. Evelyn Duval, consort of planter Gerard Duval. Vanished from the family estate on the night of April 10th. A generous reward awaits any who furnish reliable intelligence regarding her whereabouts. If you're a new hit, subscribe and join our community. We uncover the shadows history tried to erase. Drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from, and what's the time there? Day or night, these echoes reach far. Let's plunge into one of Louisiana's most chilling, hushed scandals. It started innocently enough with a modest advertisement tucked in the April 14th, 1847 edition of the St. Charles Herald. Sandwiched between pitches for steam-powered cotton presses and patent elixirs promising to cure swamp fever, a brief notice announced, "Missing Mrs. Evelyn Duval, consort of planter Gerard Duval. Vanished from the family estate on the night of April 10th. A generous reward awaits any who furnish reliable intelligence regarding her whereabouts and safe restoration." At first glance, it resembled countless other pleas for runaway wives, wayward daughters, or perhaps victims of river pirates. But this was no ordinary case. What unfolded would expose fractures in the polished facade of Southern aristocracy, revealing passions that defied law, custom, and race itself. Official ledgers and family Bibles would later be scrubbed or altered, yet whispers persist among the moss-draped oaks and murky bayous of St. James Parish. The Duval estate, known simply as Riverview, rose majestically along a bend in the Mississippi, its gleaming white columns evoking a Greek temple transplanted to humid subtropical soil. 12 pillars lined the grand veranda, symbols of wealth extracted from sugarcane and human sweat. Gerard Duval had inherited the core lands in 1839 upon his father's passing and swiftly enlarged them through shrewd purchases. Banking records from New Orleans show him borrowing heavily to acquire neighboring tracts, swelling his enslaved labor force to more than 100 souls by 1845. The plantation thrived. Fields of emerald cane stretched to the horizon, processed in steaming mills that filled the air with sweet, acrid smoke. Gerard, a stern man in his mid-40s with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes like polished flint, ruled with iron efficiency. He attended church Sundays, hosted lavish balls, and maintained the rigid hierarchy that defined the era. Evelyn Duval, his wife of 7 years, presented the perfect Southern belle on the surface. Born into a lesser Creole family in Baton Rouge, she had been chosen for her beauty, grace, and impeccable lineage. Porcelain skin, raven hair pinned in elegant curls, and a soft voice that carried the lilting cadence of French-inflected English. She oversaw the household with quiet competence, directing house servants, arranging floral displays for guests, and presiding over teas where ladies gossiped about New Orleans fashions. Yet beneath the composure simmered unrest. Letters she penned to a distant cousin, later discovered hidden in a trunk, spoke of loneliness amid abundance of feeling like a bird in a gilded cage on this endless river. The man at the center of the mystery was never named in the public notice officially. He remained a runaway field hand. But among the enslaved quarters and overseers' logs, he was known as Solomon. Tall, broad-shouldered, with skin the deep hue of polished mahogany, and eyes that held stories of a distant homeland. Purchased 3 years earlier from a trader in Mobile, he possessed uncommon skill, literate forbidden knowledge, a gifted storyteller, and strong enough to lead gangs in the heaviest cane-cutting. Whispers said he carried scars from a prior escape attempt in Georgia. Gerard favored him for his reliability, assigning him supervisory tasks that kept him near the big house more often than most. No one knows precisely when the forbidden connection began. Perhaps during the long evenings when Evelyn walked the gardens to escape the stifling mansion, or when Solomon delivered firewood to the kitchen. A shared glance across the yard, a quiet exchange of words under moonlight. In a world where every boundary was enforced by whip and law, their meetings were acts of profound rebellion. Evelyn later confided in fragments pieced together from overheard servant talk that Solomon spoke to her of freedom of stars, guiding people north of a life beyond columns and chains. For the first time, she felt seen not as property or ornament, but as a woman with desires of her own. On the night of April 10th, a storm rolled in from the Gulf thunder, rumbling like distant cannon. Evelyn retired early, complaining of headache. Gerard stayed up late in his study, poring over ledgers by lamplight. Around midnight, a house servant noticed the mistress's chamber door ajar, bed empty, with a single shawl missing. No sign of struggle. A small bundle of clothing, a few coins, and a locket gone from the wardrobe. By dawn, Gerard discovered the truth. Solomon, too, had vanished. His pallet in the quarters emptied a stolen horse missing from the stable. Panic spread like wildfire. Gerard mobilized patrols and offered rewards to dispatched riders to neighboring parishes. Bounty hunters scoured swamps and levees. Rumors flew. Abduction by river outlaws, murder and jealousy, or unthinkable elopement. When evidence mounted, a torn scrap of Evelyn's dress caught on a fence near the slave quarters and a note in Solomon's hand found in the garden, the story shifted. Gerard, humiliated, retreated into silence. Parish officials eager to preserve order buried inquiries. No trial, no public scandal. The Herald never followed up. The reward quietly expired. What became of them? Folklore claims they reached the Underground Railroad, crossing into free territory under assumed names. Others insist bounty hunters tracked them to a bayou hideout, ending the affair in violence. The swamps of St. James still holds their secrets. Bones occasionally surface after floods unnamed unclaimed. Riverview Plantation endured. Gerard remarried a younger woman from Mobile, fathered heirs, and died in 1862 amid Civil War chaos. The mansion stands today restored as a tourist site, its columns gleaming under spotlights. Tour guides mention local legends but avoid details. The official story scrubbed clean. Yet, in the quiet hours, when river mist rises and cicadas sing, some swear they hear whispers. A woman's soft laugh, a man's low voice recounting tales of distant shores. Echoes of a love that dared to cross the uncrossable line. This is the agony of our motherland. Not just chains of iron, but chains of silence. A reminder that history's darkest chapters often hide in plain sight, waiting for someone to listen. Words count 1028. Everyone had arrived from Charleston in 1844. She was the daughter of a prosperous shipping merchant whose fortune had been built on cargo routes and trade agreements, and her marriage had been carefully arranged not out of romance, but as a strategic link between business families intent on consolidating influence along the southern ports. The announcement, printed in the New Orleans Picayune, celebrated her arrival with glowing language describing her as strikingly beautiful, refined in manners and educated in music and conversation, predicting she would move through Louisiana society with grace and prestige, shaping gatherings and charitable events with quiet elegance. Yet the polished tone of public record contrasted sharply with private correspondence, discovered decades later. Letters written by Evelyn to a cousin in Virginia, uncovered in a family archive in 1952, tell a far more restrained and unsettled story. In one of the earliest, she wrote that the air here suffocates and that each morning seemed to press inward on her chest, as though the climate itself rejected her presence. She described the house as a museum filled with objects that seemed untouched by warmth, where she wandered its corridors, feeling less like a resident and more like something placed on display. She wrote of long hours observing the routines of servants and visitors, noting how conversations paused when she entered and resumed, when she left, hinting at a life surrounded by activity yet removed from genuine belonging, perished documents from the same period record. The acquisition of Henry Carter at the New Orleans slave market in January of 1846. His bill of sale, later recovered among the Duval estate documents during an academic survey in 1964, catalogued him with formal detachment as male, approximately 26 years of age, literate, skilled in carpentry, and of sound body and temperament. An additional notation, believed to have been written in Gerard Duval's hand, directed that he be assigned domestic duties and maintain the organization of the household library, a rare responsibility suggesting both trust and utility, in a space where books represented status, education, and cultivated authority. What followed outwardly appeared to be a period of routine stability. Plantation accounting ledgers from that year detail expanding yield from sugarcane fields, profits rising steadily with shipments logged alongside expenditures for equipment repairs and labor oversight. Gerard Duval's presence surfaces repeatedly within parish meeting minutes where he advocated for stricter limitations on the movement of enslaved workers between estates, arguing such control was necessary to preserve discipline and order, reflecting a mindset invested in regulation and hierarchy rather than compassion. Social glimpses of Evelyn appear within the personal journal of Margaret Fontaine, the wife of a neighboring planter who recorded impressions of gatherings, dinners, and church events. She wrote that Evelyn carried herself with a composure so restrained she seemed nearly invisible, blending into candle-lit rooms and conversation, yet her gaze lingered with sharp attention, absorbing details others overlooked, suggesting an awareness that contrasted with her silence. A Christmas entry from 1846 describes her sitting through a sermon with distant distraction, her hands folded, yet restless, before excusing herself prior to the meal, leaving speculation unspoken as winter slowly yielded to spring and the rhythms of plantation life resumed their structured cadence. Then subtle disturbances began to surface within official records. A ledger entry dated March 3rd notes that disciplinary action was required after Henry C. was discovered in the mistress's private sitting room without permission. The entry is brief, offering no narrative, only the implication of breached boundaries. Yet its presence interrupts the otherwise predictable flow of bookkeeping and raises questions about circumstance and interpretation. Other scattered notes from that season reference adjustments in staff assignments and tightened supervision, hinting that the event echoed beyond a single incident. Meanwhile, correspondence from Evelyn during those months grew less descriptive about environment and more abstract about sensation writing, of unease of listening to footsteps in hallways and wondering how easily perception becomes altered when surrounded by rigid expectation. She reflected on the stillness of afternoons where sunlight crossed polished floors and dust drifted through the air, remarking that time itself seemed suspended inside walls filled with obligation. The plantation itself continued outward function, its cycles of planting, harvesting, and trade unaffected on the surface. Wagons departed loaded with cane shipments, contracts renewed, and visiting merchants entertained on verandas overlooking ordered fields. Yet beneath the structured routine, documentation reveals the persistence of subtle tension. Parish discussions turned more frequently toward surveillance measures, while Fontaine's journal mentions conversations held in hushed tones about discipline, propriety, and appearances maintaining a fragile image of control. Evelyn appeared again within these pages, described as attentive yet distant, her voice soft when addressed, and her expressions difficult to read, as though her thoughts remained elsewhere, lingering beyond the boundaries of the moment. As seasons progressed, the records thinned, leaving behind fragments rather than full accounts, but together they form a layered portrait of intersecting lives bound within expectation, commerce, and hierarchy, revealing the contrast between public celebration and private experience, and reminding that history often survives through pieces preserved not for their clarity, but for the shadows they cast across time. A later entry, dated March 21st, records that H.C. was reassigned to field labor as punishment The notation brief and procedural suggesting discipline restored order, yet another curious entry appearing only a week later on March the 28th reverses the decision, returning him to domestic responsibilities, with the remark that at the mistress's insistence, H.C. resumed management of the library. The sudden shift raises questions about influence and attachment, though the record itself offers no explanation. As spring progressed toward April, the events of the 10th in 1847 unfolded with unusual convergence. According to the overseer's daily report, Gerard Duval departed the plantation for New Orleans on commercial business, expecting to return within 3 days, while the plantation manager's weather journal documented heavy rainfall beginning at sunset and continuing through the night, creating darkness thick with mud and obscured visibility. The final recorded sighting of Evelyn came from the cook, who later recounted to investigators that she had requested tea delivered to the library at approximately 8 in the evening, after which no further confirmed observation of her presence exists. By morning, both Evelyn Duval and Henry Carter had vanished. The response that followed grew into one of the most extensive searches recorded in St. James Parish. Gerard Duval returned immediately from the city, organizing mounted parties and foot patrols that combed through swamps, inspected roads, and questioned travelers determined to recover his wife and the missing servant. Regional newspapers amplified the alarm. The New Orleans Daily Crescent reported on April 17th that 50 men accompanied by tracking dogs moved through surrounding wilderness, seeking Mrs. Duval, feared abducted by a fugitive slave. Notices extended beyond parish borders, appearing as far north as Natchez and east toward Mobile. The prevailing narrative hardened rapidly. Headlines such as "Respected Planter's Wife Taken by Slave Framed Public Perception," while articles quoted Duval asserting that Henry had displayed signs of instability and developed an obsessive attachment to Evelyn through shared literary interests. Reward notices printed across Southern publications promised $1,000 for her return and for the capture alive or dead of Henry, described as having taken her unwillingly. Yet contradictions surfaced almost at once. A declaration offered to parish officials by Rachel, an enslaved attendant serving as Evelyn's maid, stated that the mistress had been quietly preparing a small travel case for days, placing items within it gradually to avoid notice. Though this testimony was removed from formal documentation, it survived in the personal notes of Sheriff Thomas Wilkinson, later discovered among his possessions after his death in 1861. Additional inconsistencies appeared through inventory review, revealing that clothing and personal belongings were missing, along with several volumes from the library, including works by Voltaire and Rousseau, ordered months earlier from New Orleans parish listings, recorded their acquisition. Yet their absence remained unexplained. Duval maintained they had been stolen by Henry, reinforcing the narrative of coercion. As the search stretched into a second week, another account altered speculation. A riverboat captain reported encountering a white woman and a black man boarding his vessel at a landing roughly 10 miles downriver from the plantation on the morning of April 11th. He stated they purchased passage to New Orleans, disembarking quietly into the crowded cityscape. When questioned, he described minimal conversation between them, yet observed they sat close together and that the woman kept her face concealed beneath a dark veil. Asked directly whether she appeared threatened, his reply suggested otherwise, remarking she seemed no more distressed than any traveler accompanied by a companion. Beyond that moment, their trace dissolved into urban anonymity, leaving behind only conflicting reports shaped by assumption authority and silence, and with no confirmed discovery. Thereafter, the trail of Evelyn Duval and Henry Carter faded into uncertainty, preserved only through fragmented records and interpretations that continued to provoke debate over motive agency and the nature of disappearance within the layered tensions of that era. Despite determined efforts to locate them throughout the city, especially in districts reputed for sheltering fugitives and communities of free people of color, no confirmed trace appeared. Authorities questioned dock workers, innkeepers, and vendors, yet every lead dissolved into uncertainty, A rumor circulated that they had secured passage on a ship traveling toward Haiti, but surviving maritime manifests reveal no travelers matching their identities, suggesting speculation outran evidence. As weeks lengthened into months, public perception gradually evolved. Newspapers that once echoed alarm began presenting alternative interpretations. The Picayune published a piece in June claiming that individuals familiar with the Duval household described the marriage as strained from the beginning, implying harsh treatment that might have compelled Evelyn to depart. Voluntarily, Gérard Duval reacted sharply, issuing threats of legal retaliation, and coverage soon reverted to the narrative of abduction, restoring the dominant storyline. With the arrival of autumn, discussion of the disappearance faded, and interest dwindled until it became little more than background memory. Duval sold the plantation in December 1847 and returned to France, where familial connections remained. Parish documentation records his explanation simply as unhappy memories leaving behind property and unanswered questions. 2 years later, in 1849, the plantation residence burned, entirely attributed officially to lightning, though whispers within local circles suggested deliberate destruction. Yet no inquiry followed, and the matter closed quietly. The episode might have settled permanently into obscurity had a discovery in 1958 not revived attention. During restoration of an aged townhouse in the French Quarter, laborers uncovered a sealed metal container hidden behind masonry. Inside lay a journal damaged by moisture, yet partially legible, marked with the inscription "Property of Ed." The volume passed into the custody of historians at Tulane University, whose analysis of materials placed its origin in the middle of the 19th century, based on composition of paper and characteristics of ink. Only fragments remained readable. Yet those surviving passages presented a perspective starkly divergent from accepted accounts. One entry, believed to originate in early 1846, reflects a private voice observing that G displayed greater tenderness toward his books than toward her, and noting that the newly arrived man H appreciated literature as she did conversing about authors she never imagined anyone there would recognize, suggesting intellectual companionship forming quietly within surroundings governed by hierarchy, routine, and silence. A later entry continues the voice reflective and observant, describing how H and I spoke of Rousseau today, while G occupied himself among the grinding noise of the mill machinery. She marvels at how knowledge could flourish in someone denied the pathways normally granting access to books and instruction, remarking that he must have gathered learning through rotes she could scarcely imagine, overcoming obstacles carefully built to prevent it. Their discussions of philosophy seem to offer her not merely conversation, but companionship, a meeting of minds rare within surroundings governed by hierarchy and expectation. By the arrival of winter, in 1846, the tone alters, becoming heavier, edged with apprehension. She writes of the manner in which G observes H when convinced she is unaware. Noting suspicion hardened by hostility and expressing dread at consequences she senses approaching. Later lines recount an incident where G struck her after she objected to H being reassigned to field labor, accusing her of overfamiliarity with enslaved workers, while she reflects privately that his accusation barely touches the depth of thoughts occupying her mind, revealing both fear and awakening resolve. The final legible entry, lacking a precise date yet believed to belong to early April 1847, carries the greatest disclosure, stating simply that plans have been formed. She records that when G departs for New Orleans, they intend to reach a riverboat at dawn, and that H has knowledge of contacts in the city able to guide them toward Philadelphia. She describes selecting only possessions impossible to replace, acknowledging her heart racing not only with fear, but with something unfamiliar and luminous. Possibly the first genuine sense of hope she has known since arriving in that oppressive environment. The journal's emergence decades later reignited scholarly interest, particularly among historians examining antebellum Southern society, prompting debates over interpretation. An article published in 1962 within the Journal of Southern History proposed the episode represented an uncommon example of voluntary escape, crossing entrenched racial divisions, though the argument remained contested, provoking discussion regarding agency identity and narrative framing. Additional archival work in 1964 within Philadelphia. Municipal records uncovered documentation, adding further intrigue. A marriage certificate dated October 3, 1847, listed a union between Ellen Davis and Harold Carter, identifying both as free colored persons terminology, often applied to individuals of mixed ancestry or couples navigating restrictive social boundaries. The minister who officiated preserved private annotations with the church files, noting the woman carried a Southern manner of speech, despite declaring Charleston origins and observing the husband's vigilant attention to the entrance throughout proceedings, interpreting visible anxiety in their demeanor. Subsequent taxation listings reveal Harold Carter operating a modest carpentry enterprise within Philadelphia's 7th Ward, an area recognized for its established free black population. The business remained active until 1853, after which directories indicate relocation, possibly northward into Canada, aligning with movements undertaken by many, seeking safety following enactment of the fugitive slave legislation. No confirmed trace appears afterward, leaving their later existence uncertain. Meanwhile, in 1857, a brief column within New Orleans newspapers announced the death of Gerard Duval in Paris, remarking upon his passing without direct heirs and transferring holdings to extended relatives, closing with the observation that he had never remarried after the loss of his spouse, lending a quiet finality to his narrative thread. The most unsettling development connected to the case surfaced in 1966 when archaeological examination of the former plantation grounds revealed structural remains beneath the site of the principal residence, including what appeared to be a subterranean storage chamber previously unknown. Its discovery introduced fresh speculation concerning concealed histories buried within the landscape, reminding researchers that physical evidence often emerges long after written testimony fades, and reinforcing the enduring complexities surrounding lives once entangled within that vanished plantation world, where fragments of documentation and material traces continue to challenge certainty and invite reinterpretation across generations. Within the blackened remains uncovered among the burned rubble, 3 modest objects were recovered, each carrying weight beyond appearance. The first was a delicate hair ornament formed of pearl, consistent with styles worn by women during the 1840s, its survival among ashes suggesting intimate personal loss. The second was a carpenter's measuring instrument, its wooden surface etched with the initials HC marking identity through craft and possession. The third and most evocative discovery consisted of damaged pieces of correspondence apparently hidden within the cellar. Masonry, addressed tenderly to my dearest E-analysis, performed by document specialists at Louisiana State University, revealed partially legible phrases, including words indicating urgency and fear, stating that delay could no longer continue, and expressing dread that he suspects, accompanied by a fragment implying threat with a date faintly preserved as April 7th, 1840-something, positioning it only days before disappearance. These remnants intensified, enduring questions surrounding events at the plantation during that spring. Historical documentation yields hints yet fails to provide resolution. Parish death ledgers contain no record of Evelyn Duval nor report of remains located during immediate searches. Should Gerard Duval have known more than he admitted, such knowledge vanished with him upon his passing in Paris, leaving silence where certainty might have stood. Folklore gradually filled the absence of evidence. Through the early 20th century, residents of St. James Parish recounted tales of a finely dressed pale woman accompanied by a dark-skinned man, both attired elegantly, occasionally glimpsed at twilight walking near the river trail where fields once stretched. According to tradition, these figures never addressed observers, yet moved hand in hand. glancing behind as though wary of pursuit invisible to others. Such stories persisted, shaping communal memory, blending imagination with inherited narrative. By 1968, the final individual, claiming direct connection to original testimony, passed away. Martha Johnson, aged 102 born. During bondage on neighboring land, had contributed recollections during an oral history project undertaken several years earlier. She relayed that her grandmother, once employed within the plantation kitchen, insisted preparations between Miss Evelyn and Henry extended over months, describing coded communication concealed inside book spines until discovery of one message provoked danger. When questioned regarding outcome, Johnson repeated her grandmother's belief that two versions circulated. One described flight together, seeking escape, while another, whispered, privately suggested interception prior to departure and burial beneath foundation. Yet neither account secured proof, leaving speculation unresolved. The plantation grounds remained deserted until 1973, when industrial interests acquired acreage. Intending development crews tasked with clearing vegetation reported peculiar disturbances, including misplaced tools, unexpected chills within air, and persistent odor reminiscent of smoke lingering near location of former residence. Despite passage of generations, official explanations cited environmental factors, though later remarks from personnel indicated unease among leadership, discouraging further presence, resulting eventually in project abandonment. Presently, the territory forms part of protected wildlife habitat, reachable only by navigating waterways threading reclaimed wetlands. Visitors occasionally mention hearing murmured voices carried across reeds, though authorities attribute perception to natural acoustics amplified by legend in 2008. Renewed curiosity prompted a university historian seeking original structural placement to survey terrain where flooding had exposed corroded container. Within lay compact leather journal, its contents largely erased by water. Yet a surviving portion expressed aspiration that concealment might allow new beginnings under altered identities, while acknowledging possibility of separation through death or capture. Concluding with declaration that connection between writer and recipient represented neither wrongdoing nor coercion, but a form of liberation experienced only within their bond, thereby preserving emotional testament, transcending time and continuing to invite reflection on agency, affection, and resilience, interwoven through fragments left behind within landscape where memory and mystery remain inseparable. The professor experienced a sudden stroke while still conducting fieldwork, and as a result, could not record the precise coordinates of the discovery, leaving the location uncertain and vulnerable to being lost. When another research group later attempted to revisit the site, they were unable to locate the container or confirm its existence beyond his description. His notes compiled during that expedition were eventually dismissed as unreliable due to concerns surrounding his medical state and academic enthusiasm. Surrounding the mystery diminished once again, drifting back toward obscurity. Within the parish courthouse, the formal documentation of the Duval matter remains preserved under the category of unresolved crimes, classified simply as abduction, consisting of a slim file holding aged newspaper cuttings and the initial missing person declaration. Yet beyond these official papers, alternative interpretations persist. Scattered through fragmented references housed in university repositories, folklore anthologies and stories quietly maintained by elder families of St. James Parish. These unofficial narratives explore possibilities ranging from unexpected partnership and calculated escape to darker speculation involving concealed violence, none of which can be verified with certainty. The ultimate fate of Evelyn Duval and Henry Carter therefore remains undetermined, whether they succeeded in forging lives together beyond southern reach, whether jealousy resulted in fatal confrontation, or whether their memory survives only through symbolic presence lingering along the Mississippi corridor. Regardless, their tale continues to resonate, carried through humid Louisiana air as reminder of an era when crossing racial divisions demanded courage and risk, and when distinctions separating captor from captive, victim from aggressor, affection from possession blurred beneath plantation authority. Visitors who venture into the clearing where the Duval residence once stood often describe an unusual stillness permeating the overgrown ground. Unlike tranquil abandonment, it possesses tension almost anticipatory, as though cypress and grass hold collective breath, awaiting closure that history has yet to supply. Perhaps some conclusions remain concealed. Deliberately, perhaps certain chapters remain incomplete because evidence was scattered or suppressed, preventing full comprehension and, in that sense, uncertainty itself becomes memorial honoring a woman erased from documented narrative as completely as she vanished from that storm-laden night in April 1847, and honoring also a man catalogued by history as property yet possibly capable of shaping his own destiny despite restrictions. Decades later, in 1979, renewed perspective emerged when an anthropology graduate student gathered oral testimonies from elderly inhabitants documenting cultural memory. One participant, William Thibodeau, aged 87, recounted tradition transmitted through his lineage, explaining that his grandfather had joined search parties organized after Evelyn disappeared. According to Thibodeau, these groups were not genuinely attempting to recover Mrs. Duval, but were focused on locating Henry, asserting Mr. Duval already understood her situation and directed efforts accordingly. When asked to elaborate, Thibodeau hesitated, then revealed an account he considered sensitive, claiming Evelyn had been intercepted, attempting departure, and confined within cellar quarters for several days, until Henry attempted intervention, triggering severe consequences. He suggested organized searches served more to obscure events than to rescue participants. Elements of this recollection gained partial reinforcement through correspondence uncovered during archival restructuring in 1962, letters exchanged between parish officials and state authorities in 1848, referenced tensions surrounding plantation oversight and requests for discretion concerning sensitive domestic matters, although names remained absent and context incomplete, thereby offering implication rather than confirmation. These intersecting threads illustrate how narrative evolves through documentation, rumor recollection, and interpretation, intertwining to create layered history resistant to resolution. The absence of definitive evidence ensures debate continues, inviting historians, storytellers, and descendants alike to examine meaning behind fragments remaining accessible. While records may never provide conclusion, the persistence of inquiry itself demonstrates how lives once marginalized within hierarchical systems continue influencing contemporary understanding. Their unresolved path serves not merely as mystery, but as reflection upon broader human struggles involving autonomy, loyalty, fear, resilience, and hope within structures that sought to deny such qualities. And in contemplating their legacy, observers confront enduring questions regarding truth, memory, and justice, questions that echo beyond swamps and archives into ongoing dialogue about how stories are told, preserved, and believed across generations. A document bearing the designation confidential refers to what it calls the regrettable Duval affair, implying that certain figures of influence considered the matter better concluded without further scrutiny, particularly in light of Mr. Duval having already left the jurisdiction and the significant complications that renewed inquiry might provoke. The tone suggests resolution motivated less by clarity than convenience, reinforcing suspicions that silence served interests beyond truth. Decades later, technological curiosity prompted renewed attention. During the 1980s, exploratory surveys employing early ground-penetrating radar equipment examined terrain surrounding the location where the residence once stood, revealing subsurface irregularities interpreted by specialists as possible remnants of storage structures consistent with root cellars or related chambers. Yet despite these indications, excavation permission was never granted. Ownership of the land had shifted repeatedly across generations, and those holding title refused archaeological access, citing respect for potential burial contexts and concern regarding disruption of historical remains. Consequently, whatever physical testimony might have rested beneath soil remained untouched, and interpretation returned to speculation. In 1983, restoration efforts at an aging church within Philadelphia's Northern Liberties District uncovered concealed space beneath the pulpit containing a collection of records associated with clandestine assistance networks that aided displaced individuals during the 19th century. Among these papers lay a register documenting travelers sheltered between 1847 and 1851. One notation dated November 1847 references two persons identified only as Ed and H.C., arriving from Louisiana, receiving documentation and resources facilitating movement toward Canada, accompanied by remarks describing the woman as recovering from illness and injury, while both individuals were characterized as shaken yet resolute. Discovery of this entry revived academic argument proposing that Evelyn and Henry may indeed have reached Northern Refuge, despite uncertainty. Extensive examination of census data and communal archives across probable destinations, including Toronto and Montreal, however, produced no definitive confirmation under known or alternative identities, suggesting either further relocation, intentional reinvention, or disappearance within communities insufficiently recorded. The narrative gained further dimension in 1991 when a descendant connected to Gerard Duval's extended family uncovered among inherited belongings a secure journal preserved in Paris. Authored in French and dated across years from 1848 through 1857. The text contains repeated reference to someone called Evienne. Within one notable passage composed in 1851, Gerard records receiving communication reporting belief that she had been observed within Montreal, yet declares he would not pursue expressing sentiment that losses could not be reclaimed, and asserting determination to erase remembrance altogether. The reflection neither confirms nor denies survival, yet introduces emotional complexity, revealing resignation possibly mingled with bitterness and suggesting knowledge left unspoken. Taken together, these scattered elements illustrate a story continually reconstructed through fragmentary discovery. Letters, surveys, registers, diaries, each offering perspective, yet none delivering final resolution, thereby ensuring the legacy of Evelyn Duval and Henry Carter endures suspended between documentation, memory, and imagination, inviting ongoing exploration into lives shaped by circumstance, secrecy, and the enduring pursuit of autonomy beyond boundaries imposed by their time. A subsequent entry, dated mere weeks before Gerard Duval's death in 1857, reads with ambiguity and unease, recounting dreams of Louisiana. The plantation consumed in flames, and a voice calling from below, waking each night at 3 the hour when the cellar door had been discovered ajar, expressing the sensation that certain sins cannot be escaped even across oceans, and that the presence of Evain seemed to grow stronger as his own vitality waned. Historians have debated the meaning of these entries, some interpreting them as evidence that Evelyn had survived and successfully fled north to Canada, while others view the lines as confession of guilt, suggesting that Gerard's nightmares, paranoia, and obsession in his final years were manifestations of remorse for acts of violence or complicity surrounding her disappearance. In 2002, a hydrological survey of the Mississippi River basin introduced new physical evidence to the narrative. Soil core analysis near the former plantation site revealed chemical traces consistent with accelerants indicating deliberate ignition, contradicting official records which attributed the 1849 fire to lightning. Furthermore, traces of human remains were detected in lower soil strata, though the fragmentary condition precluded determination of number, age, or sex, leaving only implication and mystery. As news of these findings became public, several descendants of families residing on neighboring plantations came forward recounting generational stories. 3 separate oral accounts reference the weeks immediately following Evelyn's disappearance, noting that enslaved laborers from surrounding properties had been conscripted to dig at night on the Duval grounds. One report specifically referenced activity around the main house foundation and cellar. The witnesses consistently emphasized that those workers never spoke openly of their actions or observations except in vague, oblique language, even decades following emancipation, underscoring a culture of secrecy and fear. A journal entry from 1865, penned by a Union officer stationed in the parish during Reconstruction, remarks upon the reluctance of both white and black residents to discuss the ruins of the Duval estate, quoting an elderly man who cryptically stated that certain grounds would not support proper crops once fed with the wrong seed, although the precise meaning remained unclear and the plot in question remained fallow since the war. These layers of oral testimony and written observation added texture to the case and suggested enduring local memory of unusual activity. In 2005, the Louisiana Historical Society commissioned a comprehensive review gathering historians, archaeologists, and forensic experts, producing a 300-page report. Published in 2007, concluding that while no single narrative could be established, the balance of evidence favored the conclusion that Evain Duval and Henry Carter likely perished on or near the plantation property in April 1847, possibly at the hands of Gerard Duval or those acting on his behalf with their remains deliberately concealed to avoid discovery. The report did include a minority opinion arguing that documentary evidence from Philadelphia and Montreal, although circumstantial, could plausibly support successful escape. This interpretation has been adopted in historical novels and in a 2010 documentary titled The Runaways of St. James Parish, which presents a romanticized vision of Evelyn and Henry finding freedom and building lives in Canada. The story evolved further in 2013 when advanced ground-penetrating radar permitted new surveying of the site, revealing a previously undetected structure approximately 30 yards from the main house, possibly an outbuilding or storage cellar absent from original records. Excavation was prevented when unprecedented Mississippi River flooding inundated the area, and subsequent alteration of geological features rendered the anomaly irretrievable. Visitors to the wildlife management area report continuing phenomena, including sudden temperature drops, the sound of a woman weeping, and fleeting glimpses of 2 figures moving through the underbrush at dusk, while park rangers attribute such occurrences to suggestion and swamp acoustics. Shadows and ambient noises compound perception, yet those familiar with the Duval story interpret the events as remnants of Evain and Henry bound to the land, either as restless victims or as spirits denied completion of their escape. The Parish Historical Society maintains a small exhibition presenting both abduction and escape narratives side by side without endorsing one conclusion over another. Displayed is a reproduction of Evelyn's portrait from the Duval family collection in France, depicting a solemn young woman with dark hair, her gaze extending beyond the painter toward some distant point. Beside it, a blank frame marks the absence of Henry's likeness, a stark reminder of how enslaved individuals could be fully erased from historical record, leaving only fragments and speculation to tell their story. Across time, layers of oral testimony, physical remnants and archival research converge to preserve a tale of disappearance, violence, hope, and uncertainty. A story where dreams haunt the living, the earth itself holds memory, and where, despite centuries of inquiry, the ultimate truth remains elusive, inviting reflection on the power of memory, secrecy, injustice, and the enduring struggle to recover the lives of those silenced by circumstance and history. Their stories survive only as fragments and omissions pieced together across decades and geographies. In 2018, a historical fiction author researching the Duval case discovered an unusual document archived in a small Montreal museum dated 1862, appearing to be a death certificate for a woman named Ellen Carter. Nate Davis, listing her age as roughly 40 and her place of birth as somewhere in the southern United States. The certificate notes she was survived by her husband Harold and 2 children. Efforts to trace these descendants have thus far proved inconclusive, given the commonality of the surname and the incompleteness of records from that era. What renders the document especially compelling is a marginal notation apparently penned by the attending physician, indicating that the patient expressed a wish before passing for certain items to be preserved for historical purposes, including a journal and a pearl hair comb, while her husband insisted they remain private, and the physician promised to honor this request. No such items have ever surfaced in Canadian archives, leaving open the tantalizing possibility that Evelyn and Henry escaped together, carrying their secrets to the grave, or alternatively perished at the Duval plantation, victims of a violent social order they dared to defy. Perhaps the truth resides somewhere between these possibilities: an initial escape followed by capture, or one surviving, while the other met misfortune. Officially, the case remains unresolved. The St. James Parish Sheriff's Department technically maintains an open file on the disappearance of Evelyn Duval, though no active investigation has occurred in over a century, and within the Louisiana State Archives, her case number is cross-referenced with that of Henry Carter, one of the few official acknowledgments that their fates were intimately intertwined. Historians of the antebellum South note that the Duval case, while unusually well documented, likely represents countless similar stories now lost, where attempts at freedom were made and thwarted or achieved, and where lives were erased from formal record. In the words of Dr. Elaine Montgomery, author of Silenced Histories, Race and Gender in the Antebellum South, the story of Yvain and Henry exists in a liminal space between documented history and folklore, between what can be proven and what was known but never written, between the official narratives preserving social order and the whispered truths that subverted it. Perhaps the most poignant expression comes from a poem anonymously published in a Montreal literary journal in 1870, titled simply E and H. While no direct connection to Evelyn and Henry can be verified, the final stanza reads 2 souls who fled across the line, where freedom meets with fear. Their names erased their paths, concealed their whispers. Still we hear. Not ghost nor flesh, but memory, too stubborn to depart. The truth lies buried not in earth, but in the human heart. On moonless nights when Louisiana air hangs heavy with moisture, and the cypress trees stand sentinel along the swamp edge, locals claim the old plantation grounds still guard their secrets. Some report hearing whispers between 2 voices, one refined with the accent of Charleston society, the other measured like a man who had taught himself to read despite laws forbidding it. Whether these sounds are restless spirits of lovers slain for defying boundaries, the psychic echoes of a desperate escape, or merely wind rustling through Spanish moss, matters less than the story itself and what it reveals about a nation still grappling with the long shadows of its past. In 2021, on the 174th anniversary of the disappearance, a small marker was placed near the presumed Duval plantation house, bearing no names, no dates, and no claims, only a simple inscription honoring those who sought freedom by whatever path was available. The marker has become an unofficial pilgrimage site attracting historians, romantics, and the merely curious. Visitors often depart with more questions than answers, but also with a deeper understanding of how completely the past can be erased when powerful interests demand it, and how persistently it can resurface through the most unlikely channels. A fragment of a journal, a carpenter's tool, a pearl comb, a whispered story, a name on a passenger list, a notation in a margin. Each fragment offers insight, yet cannot confirm final truth. As for what happened to Evelyn Duval and Henry Carter on that rainy April night in 1847, perhaps it is fitting that the mystery remains unresolved. In its very uncertainty, it mirrors a nation still struggling to reconcile its founding ideals with historical realities, still unearthing stories deliberately buried, still listening for voices long silenced, yet never truly gone. Some say that if you stand at the edge of the former Duval property on April 10th as evening falls and the first drops of spring rain begin to patter, you can hear them not calling in fear or pain, but speaking in quiet, urgent tones of possibility, of escape, of futures reclaimed from those who would deny them. Not ghosts, but something far more potent. A story refusing to end where others decided it should. A truth emerging slowly, fragment by fragment, into the light, leaving memory and hope intertwined with history and legend forever entwined in the Louisiana air.